With the WINN FM News, I am Kevin Brown. Our top stories: St. Kitts and Nevis Energy Minister assumes chairmanship of OECS Council of Ministers Energy. Tariffs and its implications for every sector. Court sentences Dwight James to 18 years for manslaughter. Guyana's president defends land sale process for private developers as Housing Authority CEO resigns. Antigua and Barbuda faces possible price rises from trade tensions. Internationally, EU facing potential tariffs from the United States. Now, the details. St. Kitts and Nevis welcomed regional energy ministers to the third Council of Ministers Energy meeting, which the Honourable Conrad Maynard chaired. The meeting, held against the picturesque backdrop of the Federation, focuses on the theme Sustainable Energy, Creating Opportunities for Reinventing the Economy of the OECS. The gathering marks an essential step toward reinforcing regional cooperation and commitment to sustainable energy solutions, which are crucial for the Eastern Caribbean's economic and environmental resilience. In his inaugural address as chair, Minister Maynard expressed gratitude to the outgoing chair, Honorary Corrine James of Grenada, commending her leadership that established significant progress in advancing the energy agenda amongst member states. Minister Maynard articulated the urgency and importance of the sustainable energy dialogue.
Sustainable energy is no longer simply a goal. It is a pathway to unlocking new economic opportunities, driving innovation, and building resilience for our small island developing states. Transitioning our energy infrastructure to sustainable energy sources, characterized by being indigenous, clean, and renewable, presents a significant opportunity to reinvent our economies. When combined with the energy efficiency measures, this transition creates a multiplied effect. While the challenges posed by climate change are well known, the solutions are within reach.
The minister underscored the potential of various natural resources across the region.
We are blessed with an abundance of natural resources across the region: wind, solar, geothermal, and the ocean itself that can power our economies sustainably. We are, after all, small island states, but large ocean states. Harnessing these resources requires vision, cooperation, and most importantly, a commitment to long-term change that benefits both our people and our planet.
He noted that for St. Kitts and Nevis, pursuing a sustainable island state agenda is not merely an ambition but an urgent imperative. Minister Maynard acknowledged the supportive resolution passed by the National Assembly regarding geothermal energy. This resolution reflects a collaborative spirit between the federal government and the Nevis Island administration, dedicated to enhancing energy security and economic sustainability. The theme of the meeting resonates deeply with the need for a paradigm shift towards green economies, where sustainable energy is positioned at the forefront of economic discourse.
The jobs created, the industries built, being vulnerable to global energy price shocks, to being more self-sufficient and resilient. By prioritizing indigenous energy sources, we reduce our reliance on imported fuels, which conserves foreign reserves and boosts our energy independence. The eventual financial savings on impacts can be, as mentioned, redirected into local economies, allowing for reinvestment in community development and social programs.
Minister Maynard emphasized the essential human element of the energy transition, reinforcing that its success hinges not only on technological advancements, but also on benefiting all citizens, particularly the most vulnerable. In a subsequent social media post, he reiterated his commitment to leading St. Kitts and Nevis through investments in renewable energy and regional collaboration, affirming, quote, "With challenges come opportunities, and by working together we can harness our abundant natural resources to build a cleaner, more sustainable future for our people. Let's make bold moves towards a thriving and self-sufficient OECS," end quote. Therefore, the conference is an essential milestone in the collective march towards a sustainable future, opening dialogues that may define the region's path forward.
OECS Ministers of Energy have concluded what is being described as a successful two-day meeting resulting in the drafting of a roadmap for the full implementation of sustainable energy. Speaking on Wednesday afternoon, St. Kitts and Nevis' Minister of Energy, Congress Maynard, outlined the key outcomes of the meeting, emphasizing the collective commitment to advancing sustainable energy initiatives.
We had robust discussions, and importantly, we had some very informative presentations and insights into the energy sector and its possibilities in the region of the OECS. One being the development of an energy roadmap, which was coined as a sustainable energy greenprint for the future of renewable energy and energy sustainability in the region going forward.
Additionally, Minister Maynard revealed that the ministers have agreed on a decade of action to ensure the successful implementation of the roadmap, highlighting the region's long-term dedication to energy sustainability.
The other important outcome, I think, of the Council of Ministers meeting here, the exercise that we had over the past 2 days, is the Bastia Declaration of the OECS Decade of Action for Sustainable Energy Development. In this declaration, it basically gives an outline of all the efforts that we intend to take over the next decade to ensure that we have sustainable energy development.
Given the current geopolitical landscape, the feasibility of achieving these goals remain a key concern. Head of the OECS Energy Unit, Chamberlain Emmanuel, addressed the challenges and targets, providing insights into how the region plans to navigate potential obstacles.
The Council agreed on a 10-year window with milestones. So we have our initial task as a commission in terms of coordinating coalition of partners and member states to fully flesh out the greenprint by the end of this year, and that we will get going right away on. However, in a preliminary way, we have projected both a regional and national minimum target for renewable energy penetration of 30% by 2035. That's the 10-year target at the regional level, but also a minimum of 20% at each member state by 2035.
Minister Maynard also discussed financing strategies, outlining how the necessary resources will be mobilized to support the ambitious energy transition.
We have effectively mandated that instead of simply identifying the items to be done, that there must be timelines associated with them. And given that we face an existential threat, really, with the situation of the fluidity of fossil fuels and their prices and the economic woes that we are facing as a result of that fluidity, we have no choice but to make these things now a reality. It's no longer a case where it is a dream that is that seems years off. We're living the reality right now when we're spending, I understand in one territory, 40 odd cents, US cents per kilowatt hour, when renewable energy through solar can give us 5 and 6 cents. So it's an economic reality that will force the results that we need. That is why the greenprint, for instance, is particularly important, because we want each member state to know that this is what is expected and when it is expected, and to provide the resources or the direction on how it can be done.
With U.S. President Donald Trump pausing the 25% and 10% tariffs on Canada and Mexico while maintaining those on Chinese goods, the question arises, what does this mean for the people of St. Kitts and Nevis? Dr. Terence Martin, professor and host of Money Matters, provided insight into the ongoing situation.
Now, it must be clarified that there's now a 30-day moratorium on these tariffs, right? As well as some of the retaliatory tariffs. Because of conversations that have since been had, regardless if we're operating under the assumption that these tariffs will go into effect. then what we can expect in the Caribbean and especially in St. Kitts and Nevis, we could look for expected trade disruptions and higher costs overall. As we're aware, many of our Caribbean brothers and sisters rely heavily on imports from Mexico, from China, from Canada, and either directly and indirectly through the U.S. supply chain. Now, especially if it's through the U.S. supply chain, we will see and actually those costs pass on directly. Now, if tariffs increase, the cost of these goods in the U.S. Could lead to higher prices for imports into the Caribbean region. Now, St. Kitts and Nevis might face rising costs for consumer goods, electronics, building materials, and automobiles. I know we have a high propensity of importing automobiles, okay, which are often sourced from, the Asian countries as well as the U.S. distributors.
St. Kitts and Nevis, being heavily reliant on tourism, could experience significant impact on the local sector. Any disruption in global trade could affect visitor spending and overall economic stability.
We also could look at if impacts on tourism. Right, if the U.S. economy shows and slows down due to these higher costs of imported goods, it could lead to weaker consumer spending. Right, and I got to remember that the U.S. economy is driven by consumption. So if consumer spending is reduced, with tourism being a price elastic industry, consumers will either look for cheaper alternatives or abandon travel altogether. All right, so could potentially reduce the number of arrivals from the U.S., even from Canada, right? If you look at it from the retaliatory perspective as well. So higher costs of goods could also raise operating expenses for things like hotels, restaurants, cruise-related businesses as well. So now we're going to have costs rising in all of our main income sectors.
Dr. Martin also highlighted that the local manufacturing sector would not be immune to the trade war. He underscored the far-reaching implications for the Caribbean region, emphasizing the potential challenges in sourcing raw materials and maintaining export competitiveness.
Countries like ours that engage in light manufacturing, such as apparel production, things for computer chips, etc., we could see higher costs for raw materials there. And that could put some pressure on those businesses. Who knows, could potentially affect employment. So if tariffs disrupts trade between the U.S., China, Caribbean ports used for transshipment and re-exporting like Jamaica, Dominican Republic, they may see reduced shipping activity, right? So it's comprehensive.
Another concern is the fate of excess produce not taken by those countries affected by these trade wars. How will this shift impact local businesses and food security?
We've heard talks. We saw Justin Trudeau come out and said that he's going to have far-reaching tariffs. He's not just looking for broad industry strokes. He's going down to the most minute of a product that could be consumed, and he's going to put tariffs there. I think it was estimated to be close to $125 billion. Now, if these tariffs that are meant to be retaliatory against the U.S. go into effect, and again, there's been a 30-day moratorium following conversations with Trump, the U.S. might divert excess agricultural products, example, grains, dairies, meat, into the Caribbean markets. Now, this could potentially lead to cheaper prices, however, could impact local farmers. If St. Kitts and Nevis exports through U.S. intermediaries, tariffs on U.S. goods could disrupt trade flows as well, reducing opportunities for the Federation. We're ramping up our agricultural production, so if we're exporting either in the agricultural sector or light manufacturing sector, same thing.
As global trade tensions continue, the implications for small island economies like St. Kitts and Nevis remains a critical area of focus. Dwight James, 34, of farm site Sandy Point, was sentenced to 18 years in prison after pleading guilty to manslaughter. The offense, committed in 2022, was ruled as manslaughter by virtue of diminished capacity. According to the police, James was sentenced on Monday, February 3rd, to His Majesty's prison. Incident occurred on August 8, 2022, resulting in the death of Louis James, also a farm site, Sandy Point. When asked to clarify the charge, Deputy Commissioner of Police Cromwell Henry explained, quote, "Diminished capacity refers to a reduced level of criminal liability due to an impaired mental state. It is not a complete defense like insanity, but lowers the charge from murder to manslaughter," end quote. James pleaded guilty on November 28, 2024 and was sentenced on February 3rd. Time spent on remand will be deducted from his sentence and he will be eligible for early release after serving a third of his term with good behavior.
In regional news, Guyana's president defends land sale process for private developers as Housing Authority CEO resigns, Guyana News source reports.
Well, hours before it became public that the CEO of the Central Housing and Planning Authority had resigned amid concerns over commercial land deals, President Irfan Ali was on his social media pages in a broadcast defending the government's allocation process to private developers. According to the president, private developers have to go through a rigorous process and meet certain commitments before they are given the title to lands. The Central Housing and Planning Authority has been facing allegations of corruption over the sale and allocation of prime lands at Ogle and along the Heroes Highway on the east bank of the Marara to developers who are believed to be close to the government.
When you look at the total acreage that was developed and divested into the hands of these Guyanese, as against the acreage that would have been allocated for private development or for development by private developers. That allocation for private developers and commercial purposes is less than 10%. Less than 10% of the lands allocated for housing and house lots.
President Ali further explained that the resources generated from the sale of land to private developers are used to cross-subsidize investment for low and middle-income families. He said through the cross-subsidization, along with the government's investments, the Central Housing and Planning Authority is able to heavily subsidize house lots that are delivered to ordinary Guyanese. President Ali said lands sold to private developers are for developmental purposes, and the process to be considered for those lands include the full payment for the land before it is divested, an agreement to develop drainage and other works in the area, as well as several other standards have to be met.
And if you look at the agreement that we signed with private developers, regardless who the developers are, first of all, there's a process. There was an expression of interest. Private developers would have had the opportunity to respond to that expression of interest, and all of the developers would have signed the same agreement.
The president also sought to compare the former government's housing policy to his government's housing policy and said land sale transactions under his government have been above board.
Antigua and Barbuda faces possible price rises from trade tensions. ABS Antigua has that story.
Rising trade tensions between the United States and some of its largest trading partners have dominated the global headlines. However, Professor C. Justin Robinson explains why all Antiguans and Barbudans should be closely monitoring these developments.
Any goods that are sourced through that supply chain that end up in our supermarkets on our shelves, we would expect to see higher prices, and everybody is crying about the prices already.
However, it is not only the price of goods in the supermarkets. Professor Robinson says this country and others in the region should brace for other possible impacts.
So we've seen some immediate effects in the currency markets and in the oil market.
U.S. tariffs on goods from Mexico and Canada and the counter tariffs from those two countries have been put on pause for a month. However, U.S. tariffs on Chinese imports and Beijing's retaliatory tariffs are going ahead. Professor Robinson explains what those trade tensions between the world's two largest economies could mean for this country.
It comes back to the supply chain.
Okay.
Are we purchasing goods that end up on our shelves that are impacted through these tariffs? Then we would see higher prices. Now, the tariffs and counter tariffs between the U.S. and China, I think, is important. The world is now trying to navigate what I call this new multipolar space. And I think that's a lot of what is playing out.
The government's debt servicing costs could also be affected at a time when the Finance Ministry is pursuing measures to ease the strain. Here's how what happens in the U.S. impacts on interest costs on the country's external debt.
What if there's inflation in the United States and the U.S. central bank decides to fight that inflation by raising interest rates, as was the big story a year, 2 years ago? Then it feeds directly into the interest payments on loans that Caribbean governments and private companies have undertaken that have flexible interest rate structures. So it's just quite a bit of potential impacts there.
We now bring you these international reports.
In Europe and here in the UK, businesses are grappling with how to react to a new, seen as more hostile trade environment. Well, this week, President Trump described America's trade relationship with the UK as, quote, out of line. He said the European Union was, quote, way out of line. Now, a British government spokesman has said the UK-US trade relationship is fair and balanced. So let's talk to Chris Southworth, who's the Secretary-General of the International Chamber of Commerce here in the United Kingdom. Chris, good to have you here. And, is that a fair assessment? How would you describe the trade relationship right now between the UK and the US?
The UK-US relationship is excellent. It's very, very sophisticated. We're both big service economies, big financial, tech and trade economies. And there's a terrific amount of flow of trade, whether it's financial or services or goods, between the UK and the US. And we're both very pro sort of open trade in the global system. So there's no reason that the two of us should get into a tariff war. I think what we've really got to do, and the big opportunity here, is to appeal to Donald Trump's business acumen and focus on the big opportunity, of which there are a number, and big opportunities up for grabs in improving trade overall for everybody. Yeah, across the whole global system, but also for US businesses.
We'll talk about those opportunities in just a sec. But is there a potential here that the UK, gets caught up in all of this? That big spat we know is going on between the US and China, also with its northern neighbour Canada, also with Mexico, its biggest trading partners, the European Union, of course. The UK could just be collateral damage here, couldn't it?
There's always a risk. I don't think that's likely to happen. The relationship with the US is very good. The relationship with the EU is very good and improving. But we're independent of US and EU. So we play quite an important and interesting role between the two big trade blocs. And I think that the government and the Prime Minister is doing a good job of navigating the space and not getting caught up in direct battles on tariffs.
So where are those opportunities? Where can the UK stand out here?
Well, the big economic opportunities in trade are twofold. First of all, there's a $10 trillion opportunity up for grabs by simply transforming and modernizing trade systems. The US and UK are perfectly positioned to help lead that drive across the whole global system. And that includes the deployment of technology across the whole trading ecosystem to make trade cheaper, faster and simpler for everybody. Everybody wins from that. And the second big opportunity is a $2.7 trillion chance to improve access to finance, working capital for small businesses. And to do that, we have to shake up the regulatory system, which is suffocating access to finance. And again, the US and UK are perfectly positioned to begin that process and lead it globally. But I think we have to appeal to Donald Trump's business acumen, I think, is the real opportunity. Tariff wars are nobody wins, but there are real win-wins here that I think would really appeal to him, and where he can play a leading role globally and benefit US businesses. Everybody wins.
Israel have faced several war crimes allegations since the start of the war in Gaza in October 2023. Allegations Israel strongly denies, with the backing of their closest ally, the US. Hamas have also faced war crimes allegations for the attacks on October 7th. So let's recap. Who's making the accusations? What's the evidence? And where do the legal proceedings stand? The prosecutor at the ICC has issued arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, accusing them of being responsible for several war crimes during Israel's military campaign in Gaza. The allegations include starvation, willful killing, intentionally directing attacks against civilians, and extermination. Here are some examples of claims by the ICC and other rights groups against Israel. Over 47,200 Palestinians have been killed, many women and children. Doctors working in Gaza claim Israeli snipers and drones targeted children.
This was day after day after day, operating on children who would say, I was lying on the ground after a bomb had dropped, and this quadcopter came down and hovered over me and shot me.
Israel strongly denies targeting civilians.
Hamas hides behind civilians, and inevitably some of those civilians have regrettably and tragically been harmed.
There are further allegations of Palestinian civilians, including children, being detained and mistreated. One case alleges an adult detainee was subjected to sexual assault. Videos appear to show detainees being used as human shields to check unexplored tunnels and homes for traps. The US State Department is investigating prisoner mistreatment, while the Israeli military have opened 74 criminal investigations into conduct by soldiers. Most cases are ongoing, however, some officers have been found guilty.
Madam President and distinguished members of the court.
In December 2023, South Africa filed a case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, accusing them of committing genocide in Gaza. 14 countries have joined the case. Their evidence includes the destruction of over 66% of Gaza's infrastructure, causing the mass displacement of 90% of the population, 1.9 million people. Prosecutors at the ICJ claim this has inflicted conditions intended to cause the destruction of the Palestinian people. Further evidence shows Israeli leaders and officials allegedly inciting to commit genocide.
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק.
South Africa argued this statement shows specific intent to commit and persist in committing genocidal acts. The ICJ ordered provisional measures in January 2024, aimed at preventing any acts that could be considered genocidal. The case is still ongoing, with a final verdict undecided. Both the ICJ and ICC depend on member states to carry out arrest warrants and uphold their rulings. The US has rejected both cases. France, Italy and Hungary have given immunity from the ICC's arrest warrants because Israel has not signed the Rome Statute. However, Israel is a signatory to the UN Charter, so the ICJ's rulings are theoretically binding.
If Israel or other member states do not comply with the ICJ's final verdict, it's perhaps unclear what will happen. The decision would be referred to the Security Council by the state that wins the case, so to speak. But in this case, because where Israel has significant allies on the Security Council, that is like to block any action.
The prosecutor at the ICC has also accused the leaders of Hamas, proscribed as a terrorist group by Western countries, of war crimes and crimes against humanity from October 7, 2023, including extermination and murder, taking hostages, rape and sexual assault, torture. Hamas was also accused by many of committing genocidal acts on October 7th, but cannot be prosecuted at the ICJ because Gaza is not a state. Allegations that Hamas rejects, calling baseless. Evidence includes the killing of over 1,200 people. More than 800 were civilians, including children, with some footage taken from the cameras of the attackers themselves.
One of the clearest war crimes committed by Hamas is the conduct that we saw on October 7th.
Images of victims' bodies indicate sexual violence, decapitations, and burning. Around 251 people were taken hostage, including children and elderly. Some have since been released. More than 100 hostages are presumed dead. The ICC has issued an arrest warrant for Hamas commander Mohammed Daif, who's believed to have orchestrated the attacks, with Hamas commander Yahya Sinwar, plus Ismail Haniyeh. Since then, all three leaders have been killed.
So the implications of it being confirmed that Mohammed Daif is deceased means that it's highly likely the International Criminal Court will kind of close the case against Mohammed Daif. And I think that will have a significant political implication because the only arrest warrants in the kind of Israel-Hamas conflict will be issued towards Israeli figures.
There's no deadline for a final verdict to be reached by the ICC or ICJ. The court's authority and how justice is served if Israel or Hamas are found guilty remains unclear, as some countries refuse to follow their orders.
The US Postal Service did a U-turn on Wednesday. It had suspended the delivery of parcels coming from China and Hong Kong, but later said it will now accept them. That follows President Donald Trump's move to shut a trade loophole that allowed small-value packages to be shipped duty-free. The so-called de minimis provision allowed importers and US shoppers to avoid duties on goods worth less than $800. The change posed a big challenge for fast-growing online retailers like Temu and Shein. They've built big businesses shipping products from China at rock-bottom prices, often using the de minimis rule. USPS did not immediately comment on whether its temporary suspension had been tied to Trump's order ending de minimis shipments from China.
We're going to do very well against China and against everybody else.
His move was announced on Saturday and came into force from 1 minute past midnight on Tuesday. Shein and Temu might face further complications in the US. Reports by news website Semaphore claim the Department of Homeland Security could add the pair to its list of firms suspected of using forced labour. The report said no final decision had been made. Both firms denied using forced labour. Responding to Trump's tariffs, Beijing has put several US firms, including Alphabet's Google, on notice that they could face sanctions by China.
Sweden mourned the victims of the country's deadliest gun attack on Wednesday, as police said there was no evidence of, quote, ideological motives behind the mass shooting. At least 11 people were killed and many more wounded at an adult education centre in Örebro on Tuesday. Police said the attacker appeared to have acted alone and shot himself dead at the scene. They said the motive was not immediately known and warned of misinformation and contradictory rumours being spread online. According to Swedish media reports, the attacker was a 35-year-old unemployed recluse. Sweden's king and queen visited the school on Wednesday, as Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson called for the country to come together in mourning after the dark day. Flags were flying at half-mast in Örebro, as well as at Parliament and the Royal Palace in Stockholm. Outside the school, people laid flowers and lit candles in a vigil. Abdullah Altain, whose friend is one of the victims of the attack, says, quote, words can't explain what happened. Here is school principal Marcus Altun.
It's absolutely terrible. You don't think it will happen anywhere, and especially not here.
Altun added that there would be a psychologist and school doctor on site for the students. Sweden has been struggling with a wave of shootings and bombings caused by an endemic gang crime problem. However, fatal attacks at schools are rare.
You were listening to the WINN FM 98.9 newscast. Our top stories were: St. Kitts and Nevis Energy Minister assumes chairmanship of OECS Council of Ministers Energy. Tariffs and its implications for every sector. Court sentences Dwight James to 18 years for manslaughter. Guyana's president defends land sale process for private developers as Housing Authority CEO resigns. Antigua and Barbuda faces possible price rises from trade tensions. Internationally, EU facing potential tariffs from the United States. Thank you for listening.